this week is the 300th of On Refait le Mac. So exceptional program, exceptional guest, Tony Fadell, the inventor of the iPod, of NES, and the serial investor, the man who worked at the heart of Apple, alongside Steve Jobs, that of course we're getting Google. Exclusive interview. So hello everybody, you're watching On Refait le Mac, ORLM. Welcome to 42 L'École, watching the future talents of tomorrow. 300th edition of On Refait le Mac. Thank you, audience. We'll give you a round of applause for celebrating this anniversary with us, celebrating this birthday. And of course, thank you, all of you who are out there loyally looking at your screens, your iPhones, your iPads, your Macs, and go on, let's go crazy, your Android telephones, even your PCs. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for coming every week for tuning in. On average, 60,000 people are clicking on the button each week, so thank you. So you can see the program on www.onrefaitlemac.com. You can see it on Dailymotion and on YouTube. You can subscribe and just click on the thumb. As well, you can see it on iTunes and podcast, of course, in HD and in audio version. You can download that, and of course on Twinity, of course, if you've got Sonos, and as well on ORLM, on our app for iOS, for App Store. You can get it on App Store for iPad and iPhone, of course, Apple TV. You can get us on social media on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So, as I was saying, this is the 300th. We've got a very rare man in the media, and so it's rare as well. People who said that they've actually created an object that almost everybody has used. He didn't just create one of them, he created two. Ladies and gentlemen, the inventor of the iPod and the iPhone, Tony Fadell.
Hi, Tony. Thank you to be here. Thanks.
Merci beaucoup.
Tony, someone tell me that you speak a very good French.
No.
Try to say something. I'm very curious about your French.
Ils ont menti.
Ils ont menti?
They lied. Anyway, you've got the earpiece there. Can you hear okay? It's Bernard at the end of it all. So once again, thanks again, Tony, for coming along and accepting our invitation. It's a great honor for us. We're really happy. And so we're closing off our cycle of entrepreneurs from France and elsewhere. And it's a special program just for you. You're going to go into your memories with Apple, Nest, Paris, of course. And of course, we're going to have our usual journalists who are going to ask the questions a bit different this time with this big screen here behind us. There's little recorded videos. So I suggest we get down to brass tacks, and if you don't mind, we'll look at your first chapter, your first professional chapter of life, of course, the adventure with Apple. So Tony, you joined Apple in 2001. So this was the dream come true, no?
For me, back in 2001, it was a bittersweet thing to actually to join Apple because, you know, Apple wasn't the healthiest at the time. The internet disaster happened of 2000, where the crunch happened, and I was I had my own startup at the time, so I was trying to keep that alive. So there were lots of different things that were happening all at the same time, and when I was originally going to go to Apple, that was as a consultancy. So I was going to be a consultant for a couple of months. And then after that, I was going to return back to my startup and take the money I earned and keep the startup going. So I didn't quite know what was going to happen during that time. Obviously, in hindsight, it was all great and it was all wonderful. But it was definitely after my first meeting with Steve, and pitching the iPod, and also the subsequent people I met and things, then I got very excited. But the initial call and what I had was, this is a great thing to help me get some money to help fund my startup. That's the way I was thinking. But then subsequently, it became a whole different thing when I knew it was the iPod, when we had designed it, then met Steve, and then pitched it to him. So then the emotions started going up and up and up.
Well, you're going to tell us about the pitch with Steve. It must have been a great moment, I'm sure, but we'll come back on it. But you were saying it was a bit a bit ambivalent in a way, because you had your own startup, and you had, you're a serial entrepreneur. I think when you were still in college, you started your startups. So I'm saying it's sort of a dream come true in a way, because I read this was your first computer, no, the Apple II?
Yes, actually, my relationship with Apple started, when I was very young, back in the early 80s. My first computer was literally a mainframe and it wasn't my computer, but the first one I used, it was a mainframe with just a paper display. There was no display, it was paper, and you would type, and it was a terminal, and it would go bzz, bzz, bzz. So it was a printer with a keyboard and a mainframe attached. That was the very first computer I ever used, and that was in, what was it, CA1.
But you started very young, we'll say. You started very young.
Yeah, but CA1. And so then I was using bubble cards. So you would literally have pencils, and you would make your code in pencils and feed it into a reader and all those things. But then after using that for a year or so, then I got my very first Apple II. And that was, life-changing, because it was right there in my bedroom, and I could use it all the time.
Yeah, changes from a mainframe, that's for sure. So, I mean, your assignment, if you like, you joined up as you were there, you were sort of to create some sort of Walkman. Is that what you were there for?
Well, when I first got the call, I didn't know what I was about to do. It was Apple's, as you know, super secretive, and so you don't know exactly what the call was about. Yeah, you just I'm going to go see. I figured it was about personal digital assistants, PDAs, because that's what I had been doing at the time, and people knew that's what I was used. That's what people knew me for. But then it turned out to be, we see a lot of different MP3 players out there in the world at the time. The iPod wasn't the first one. But we don't think this is done right. We're trying to hook up iTunes, which was about 6 or 9 months old at the time. We're trying to get iTunes to hook up to these MP3 players. It's a horrible experience. We think there should be an Apple version of that. We know that you're working on MP3 players and you've worked on portable things. Would you come and consult for us and design and outline a project that would be around that? And then 6 weeks later, the basics of the iPod was created and then shown to Steve.
So we're going to come back into further detail on where the iPod came from in the next chapter. So, Tony, where did the idea come from? It was something that you brought. I mean, what we see here with the hard disk, with the ring there, Johnny Ive's design we can see there. But was it simplicity? That was what you were thinking about before you arrived at Apple, right?
Well, I had trained under Andy Hertzfeld and Susan Kerr and Bill Atkinson at General Magic. And so I learned about simplicity and what user experience was all about there. And so when I went to create my startups, it was always about that and being user-centered and create interesting, simple products. And so when I had my startup company just before going to Apple, I was creating digital media electronics, so MP3 players, but they were rack mount. So it was a CD player with a hard drive, and you would put your CD in, and it would take it, and then take the track and rip it, and put it on the hard drive to make a jukebox, right? And so we were designing that at the startup that I was in, and that was the reason why I wanted that, was because I was a DJ. So in the 80s and 90s, I was a DJ, yes. And so I would always carry a lot of CDs around with me. right?
Organize a cocktail just after.
Yes, I'll go do some spinning. There's no but no, seriously. So I always hated carrying and lugging around all of these CDs because they were so heavy. And then from there, I was doing handheld electronics, right? And we started to put audiobooks on the handheld electronics because we had just enough memory to do that. And so I was like, wait a second. We have this, an MP3, this was in the late 90s. We have CDs with digital data, we have MP3s coming, and we have these devices, these handhelds, starting to play audio files, voice files. And so all of those things came together, and my need for, getting rid of all that weight, that I would have to carry everywhere from gig to gig.
So you were convinced about the dematerialization of music. So you're saying when you were a teacher, the first prototype was made in 6 months, which is just really, really quick. When you're looking at traditional companies.
Yeah, it was the program itself, started. I started as a consultant in the last week of January of 2001, and then we shipped it, the first iPod, in the first week of November 2001, right? And there was no team. It was just me. And so we had to build the team, and we couldn't take people from other parts of the company for the most part. We had to build the team, and we had to build all the technology, and we had to build maybe a lot of the skill sets and find new manufacturing as well. Because the scale of the iPod was very different than the computers Apple was making at the time. And so even the components were different, how you created the boards, everything was different. The displays were different. So we had to go and find all this and put it all together. And through my experience and the team that I brought on, we had been building these kinds of devices over the past decade, so we were able to pull things together rather quickly. But yes, we had to start from scratch.
But so you had more freedom in Apple, perhaps, than you'd had, say, with Philips before. Everything was quicker with Apple?
Well, everything was quicker for a couple of reasons. One was Steve's involvement. When Steve was involved, everyone knew that it needed to get done, right? So if this was his thing, everybody understood you better follow the leader, right? And make this thing come to light. But no one believed that we were going to ship it in 2001. I had learned from my time at Philips and other companies that when you create something new inside of a large company, most of those things die. Especially at Philips, maybe 7 out of 10 new things that they started, maybe 9 out of 10 things would actually die somewhere along the path, right? So if you took too long to get it out the door, political forces, financial forces, all these things happen to kill interesting projects inside of a company. And so I knew that if we were going to do this, we had to do it as fast as we possibly could, because I was worried about, one, internally that the project would die, and two, that Sony or some other very large consumer electronics brand that was well known for audio would come in and take our moment away from us and make a easy to use, logical, consumer friendly iPod or MP3 player. So it was my experience of having things killed. It was my understanding of what I knew of Steve from my time at General Magic, and as well as the external market forces, possible competition that we were always scared of, that forced my thought as we need to ship this as soon as we possibly can, and we need to meet this Christmas season. It's, with MP3 players and most consumer electronics, it's always get it ready for the consumer season, which is Christmas. And that's when 1/3 to 1/2 of all consumer electronics sales happen is in that one quarter. So it was all of those things coming together to move the project to the market as quickly as possible.
So just look around at the screen. We've got the first question from one of the people, and Didier Poulican from Mac Forever, on the first generation of iPods on the screen. So the iPod owes its success to pirating, to MP3. So today with HomePods, with Siri, Apple Music, hasn't Apple lost its philosophy, its original philosophy of being a bit rebellious and piratey?
Well, you have to remember that, the very first iPod came, and subsequent ones afterwards. I don't remember when we stopped. But there was always a plastic wrap that you took off the iPod. And it just said, "Don't steal music." Right? It was on there. It was a warning saying, "Don't steal music." You know, because if you stole music, sooner or later the whole economic chain will collapse, and all the musicians and all the artists we love will not be able to make money, and they will stop making music. So this wasn't about Apple being rebellious and saying, "Oh, we're going to allow you to steal more music." Right? It was never about that. It was about taking the music that you love and making it even more convenient and consuming it even more often so that you could enjoy it more, and therefore the music industry could thrive again. Right? MP3 might have been the opening, and it was all about illegal activity. What we were able to do was shift that to something that was economically beneficial for everyone, and the consumer got convenience. Because most people don't remember MP3s back in the day in 2000, 2001, when you were trying to download them from the internet was slow, right? It was very slow back in the day. You had to store all these files, you had to figure out where to find it, there were errors. It was not convenient at all. So what we were trying to do was make it really simple for everyone to enjoy digital music, but try to distance ourselves from the stealing. You know, they called it sharing, which is really stealing. Depends if you're Chinese or not. In the world of China, anything you share is, in our world, we say stealing. So basically, you need to, we were trying to shift the market to get people to get more people to love digital music, but in the right way to support the artists and the music economy.
And so somebody from the digital area that would take it to that arena, but that's another story. So something else I found is, I found this on Bloomberg. So the original iPod team, it's a very special place. This is the secret lab, right? Where you've got John Rubinstein, Johnny Ives, Steve, and Phil.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very special place, no?
Well, aussi, je suis chauve maintenant.
I've got the same problems.
But yeah, no, this was back in 2000. I don't remember what year. This looks like 2003 or 4. But yeah, no, this was all of us back in the day, and all these guys were doing different things all in the company. I was focused entirely on iPod at the time. But yeah, no, it was a good time. And
there's lots of iPods on the table.
Beaucoup de, yes, absolument. We did, you see the world sees about 18 generations. Well, I think there were 20 generations, but 18 generations of iPod that my team and I worked on and built. But yeah, no, it was a lot of, it was amazing how much we did in a very short period of time, not just the first year, but every year after, because then we would come out with 3 models of iPod almost every year. So it was quite a lot of fun, and changing the world of music at the same time. So it's great.
Yeah, you were working with an iconic figure, Steve Jobs. We're going to talk about him in the next chapter. So, do you remember the first time you met Steve? Can you tell us about that?
Well, I knew of Steve when I was working at General Magic, right? And also the stories we read. But I didn't really meet him until the first time when Andy Hertzfeld, who is one of the founders of General Magic, I went to his birthday party.
So if you've missed out to the previous episodes, he's one of the founding fathers of Macintosh in 1984, who founded General Magic afterwards in 91.
Exactly, and that's Andy. But so I went to Andy's birthday, and at Andy's birthday, Steve came. And he just walked down the street because they lived, a few blocks from each other. He just walked down the street and he showed up, and we all just said hi and gathered on. It was a very low-key thing. But this was, remember, this was not before, this was when Steve this was, I think, 1992 or 93. This was when he was still at Next. This was when everything was very, very different time.
More accessible, maybe, on this time.
He was more accessible at the time.
Yeah, he was usually more accessible. Actually, he was more accessible than you might think. right? But in that case, he just would walk down the street, and he would always walk down the street, even when it was, 2005 or what have you. So, but no, that was the first time I met him. But I had all these visions and all these stories that I heard from all the general magicians that I worked with who, created the Mac, and all those interesting anecdotes that had happened during the time the Mac was created. So, good stories.
So when I was saying earlier on that it was a dream for you to work in Apple, in fact, it was the original Macintosh team, in fact. So, I mean, there was Andy, and then a few more pictures here of what you did with him. Motorola Envy. That was in 1991, I remember the date. The ancestor of an iPad today, in fact.
Well, this is the General Magic Cap device. One of them was made by Motorola. Another one was made by Sony. We had many, many different people who licensed and tried to make these devices. But, this to me was the precursor of the iPhone, just 15 years too soon. Okay, and if you're ever in technology, you'll know that you might have a good idea, but timing is everything. Right, you have to know when to line up the right thing at the right time. And many, many, many of the concepts, this was pre-internet, right? This is 1993, 1994. This was pre-internet. And so if you look at this had electronic Rolodex, calendar, you had downloadable apps, games, you could send emails wirelessly. If you see that antenna there, we actually had wireless email. You had audio, you could make phone calls, you could make animations, you could shop on it. And so this was literally the iPhone just 15 years too soon.
And it cost $20,000, right?
No, it didn't cost $20,000. No, actually, this one was more expensive, but the Sony device was about $700, $800 back in the day, right? Just a little bit more expensive than the iPhone was when it first launched.
So, back to Steve and the iPod. So, what's it like pitching to Steve Jobs and you're selling him the idea of the iPod? What was it like? I mean, it's quite intimidating, though.
Sure. Well, what was it like? Well, first, we need to go back to, the General Magic days. So at the General Magic days, we would be working around the clock 6-7 days a week. And we would hear stories during the lunchtime or breakfast time or dinner time about what happened with the Mac, right? And what happened with Steve and the Mac and various vendors. And so you get this kind of vision, this picture of what Steve was like back then. And so you just assume that that's what it's going to be. So I was like, very nervous going into my first real pitch meeting. I had met him for a birthday party, but that was a whole different situation. So I'm going to go into my very first pitch.
A bit like today. But it's going to be okay now, right?
Exactly, just like that. You're very intimidating.
Yeah. I'm sorry for that. Yeah.
So when I was entering the room, I had been, and you're waiting outside to go into his conference room, you're like, you get so nervous, right? But then after about, I started at the beginning, and after about 10 minutes, none of that stuff that I had in my head, all those visions, had happened. None of that stuff occurred. And even when there was an idea and I had been taught how to pitch to him from some people at Apple, was really about, I had 3 different concepts to show, 3 different iPod concepts. So you put the worst one first, and then the second one, which is slightly better, and the third one, which was the one you really want to sell. And so you could get his comments all the way along the way and what have you. And so that was a very interesting thing. The other one was that you create a presentation. And back then, you just had printed slides. There was no keynote. There was no digital displays or anything. So you just had these things. And Steve would go, you'd hand it to him, and he'd just go, Psh. And then he would just go, take over the meeting. So all this preparation would thrown out the door. But it was really just a very good meeting, very concise, very passionate, emotional. And he was at the end of the meeting, after showing him what was there and talking about it, he was just like, okay, we're doing this. We're going to do it. We're going to move to the next step. And now we need you on the team driving it and making this reality. And that was the end of the meeting. And so I walked out of the meeting and I was like, wow, what just happened? Because I still have my startup at the time and everything. I'm like, oh, what's going on here? You know, I thought it was just a consultant. And then the other people who were in the meeting came out like high-fiving, going, that's one of the best meetings we've ever had. Oh my God. And I was like, oh, okay, great. I didn't know. So good thing it didn't go the other way. So it was a fun meeting, and literally right then and there, the iPod was green lighted to go to the next steps, which was to go, you know, beyond just an idea, but to go to prototypes and then ultimately manufacturing.
So the next step is the iPhone, right? I guess. When did you start talking about the idea of producing a phone?
Well, about 2003, late 2003, 2004, after the iTunes Music Store had started to roll, we started to see a real business. You know, remember the first year and a half to 2 years of the iPod, it wasn't a runaway success because it only worked on Macs. It didn't work on PCs. It didn't have a digital music download store or anything like that.
Firewire.
Yeah, you had FireWire, so you didn't have FireWire on your PC. We didn't even have a client on your PC for it. And so it wasn't necessary. It was a critical success, but not a business success because a lot of people who wanted to use it couldn't because it was incompatible. So once we made it compatible and we got the music store, things started rolling. And that's when the rest of the industry woke up. And specifically the mobile phone industry woke up. And they said, wait a second, if they can do this, well, we could do digital music on our phones. And so we started to hear...
It was a risk.
Yeah, it was a risk. It was, okay, well, the discussion was, we know that people will only carry one thing in their pocket, digital thing in their pocket. And is it going to be a phone or is it going to be an iPod over time? And if the phone does iPod-like functionality, well, we could be really screwed. Right? We could lose this whole business that we're now getting going after 2.5 years and people loving it, right? Even on the PC. So that then kicked off what became the Motorola Rocker project. So the Motorola Rocker was a Motorola phone that had some iTunes capabilities to sync music onto it, but it was limited. Really? It was very limited. It was so limited that it was a disaster. Right? Because it wasn't an iPod experience, and it wasn't truly an iTunes experience. It was this quasi-weird thing that we couldn't get the user interface to work right. Motorola was difficult to work with. They didn't really try to do the things we asked them to. So then we threw that out. We threw that out the door, and then right after that Motorola project Rocker was announced, that's when we all got the thing to say, okay, now it's time to explore a mobile phone. So then we made an iPod plus phone. So it was an iPod with the wheel and with a phone in it. And
we've got a photo here of it. We've got a photo.
Well, that wasn't. Yeah. So it was that iPod. Yes. Yeah, similar to that. Yeah, that's kind of what it was. So we made that. And then at the same time, we were making a video iPod with a touchscreen. And then on another part of the company, they were making a Mac with a multi-touch touchscreen.
And so we'll come back to the genesis of the iPhone, but just before we do that, and a big thanks to our sponsor, Lacey, who has been supporting us for several years now, specialists of storage on Mac, the first constructor, the first manufacturer to have a RAID disk, compatible disk, so the 6 big and the 12 big, which are made for measure of the new iMac Pro 6 big. You've got up to 6 hard disks, and with up to 1400 megabytes per second, and the 12 is up to 12 disks, archiving up to 120. And so, in other words, you can transfer an hour's 4K video pro resolution in just 5 minutes. Thank you, let's see. So now the iPhone. So the iPhone. What was your assignment? What was your mission that Steve Jobs gave you? It was to adapt the iPod and to transfer it into a phone. So we saw it with the ring, the dialing ring, but that was a joke, no?
Right. When you look back now, it seems to make a lot of logical sense that the iPhone should have happened, right? Like, oh yeah, we just popped out of our brains. It didn't work that way, right? So there was, like I said, there's the iPod plus phone, right? So you can like all your music, we'll just add phone capabilities and a directory to it and we'll be done with it. It'll be that simple. Well, unfortunately, malheureusement, the wheel didn't work very well for dialing, right? And we tried for about 3 months.
It's not very practical.
Yeah. Some of us who are old enough remember a rotary dial phone, and they're very not fun to use. So we tried every which way to try to make that work while preserving the look and feel of an iPod. We couldn't make that work, and it was very frustrating. And at the same time, we were making a video iPod, which was a full screen iPod, but had a single touchscreen to do the different controls. So it was because we had an iTunes video store at the time, and people wanted to take their video everywhere, and they wanted to see a bigger screen. So then we had that and that. And then over here, we had this thing called a multi-touch Mac, which was a Mac, wasn't really a Mac, it was a projector in a room on a ping pong table. And it would project a Mac display on it, and then it had a multi-touch electronics around it, so you could touch in different places like a big tablet. So it was by no means a product-ready thing, but it was to try to get the experience of what multi-touch might be on a Mac. And so after the iPod plus phone wasn't working, we all started tearing our hair out, and the video iPod wasn't quite right because single touch wasn't quite right, but it felt really good. It felt good from the screen perspective, but it didn't feel good from the interaction perspective. And then we had this multi-touch thing, and that seemed like, okay, well now it's time to put all three of those things together, right? And that's what happened. And then we created something that merged them all, which was this, right? And then this one happened. So we made a whole nother iPhone before this and threw that away to then finally get to this first generation iPhone as you know it. So, and that took about 2.5 years along the route.
So the design of the iPod was 6 months. So the iPhone was much more difficult, and as you said, it was a big gamble to use this multi-touch technology. It was only working in the lab because and going from the lab to production in 2 years is incredible.
Exactement. If you think about it, the technology inside the phone is 20 times more complicated than in an iPod, right? So there was a music player, but then we had to create a whole company to create the multi-touch display because there were no manufacturers of it like today. We had to create a whole company and design team just to try to productize just the screen, right? Then we had to go and figure out how to make a cell phone. No one had made a cell phone inside of Apple before and qualified it on networks around the world and make a cell phone work, right? Then we had a whole new set of operating system software that was not the Mac and it wasn't the iPod, but it was a blend of the two, and a lot of things stripped out and changed. And then you had to make all the apps on top of it, right? And then still connected into iTunes and everything else. So if you look inside, there was many different moving parts that all had to come together to pull this off. And that's why it took so many years to make that happen, whereas the iPod was much more simple.
And then the big day came, the 9th of January 2007. Look at this video presenting the iPhone for the first time. So it was a long path to get. Can you tell us, what do you remember of that day, of that moment particularly?
Are you getting it?
What do I remember? Well, I remember it, very fondly in a way, but it was a very scary time. You have to remember that each of these events are the first time we're showing these kinds of products to the world, right? And they're demos. And this demo was put together with, tape and glue, and it was really delicate. We couldn't breathe on it. We had multiple phones underneath the podiums and stuff to get out and to in case something broke.
So you cheated a bit, right? You cheated a bit.
No, we did not cheat. We did not cheat. No, it was not cheating. We did not cheat. But we had to have multiple devices because the software hardware, all of it was very fragile, right? It was not even alpha yet. It was like prototype stage. And we had 6 months to ship it, so there were so many things to get working. And there was also Wi-Fi in it, right? We didn't even, if you remember, Wi-Fi was even difficult to get running back then. So you sit in the audience and you're just like, is it gonna work? Is it gonna work? Is it gonna work? Yeah, croissant les doigts. Right? Because, and he wanted to show off many parts of it. So the longer it goes on, the more time for errors to pop in. So it's not a very nerve-wracking experience until after it's a very nerve-wracking experience until after it's over. And then you can go, oh, and then you fall over and, je suis épuisé, or j'étais épuisé. So that's the kind of thing that happened. So it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, it was all the emotions. And it was, incredibly difficult for the iPhone, but for all of the iPod introductions and all the things that my team and I were involved in were, they're exciting.
And you were talking about a team. There's a picture I like a lot here.
There we are.
Just after the keynote, I think, at the Moscone Center, where you've got Johnny Ives, the two Phils, Scott Fostel, and Diddy Q. Are you still in touch?
Yeah. Eddie and I, we talk all the time. He was here in Paris just a couple months ago. I talked to Phil. He came through. He comes up through for Le Mans every year. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, ask him to come and talk to us here at On Refait le Mac. So a few months later, you decided to leave Apple after the successful launch.
A few months? No, much longer than that.
2 years?
Yeah, it was, let's see, this was 2007, officially left in 2010.
Oh, okay.
So why did you decide after 2 or 3 years to leave Apple? You'd done everything you had to do there?
Well, very clearly to me was that my wife, who also worked for Steve Jobs, we met at Apple.
HR, right?
Yeah. She ran HR for the entire company, and she reported to Steve. We met each other in 2002, and we had worked together, for all those years. And then we got married, obviously, but we had kids. And our kids were 1.5 and a half year old at the time, and we did not see them, right? So my first son was born just 3 weeks before the iPhone introduction. Okay? And so when you have kids and you don't see them and you're working so hard, and for my wife, it was really, it was a very staggering moment for both of us. We came home one day from work, and our oldest was crying and was just very, very upset. And instead of running to his mom, he ran to the nanny. And if you're a parent, you understand, like, wait a second, the kid doesn't even know who his parents are, right? So that was a very telling moment. And from there, that's when we went to Steve and we both said, it's time for us to retire and move on, because we need to spend time with our children, because no matter how much money we make, we will never be able to buy this time back with our children. And Steve was like, that is the only good reason that I would allow you to leave, right? And so that was the overarching thing, was to spend a lot more time with our family after that, 8-9 years working so hard.
So, with your years in Apple, another question from one of our stars, Cédric Ingrand, and he's got a question about his car.
Hi, Tony.
So I've got a question, Tony, because you knew the world from inside Apple and from the outside with Nest and everything. So when you're going to relaunch your own startup, something huge, amazing and great, of course, what are you going to keep from Apple, the way that you worked at Apple, the design products, the brand, distribution, all the rest? And what are you going to deliberately leave to one side? So I think what he's saying is he wants you to make an electric car. Is that the idea? But anyway.
So, what did I learn from my days at Apple? At General Magic, I was able to learn a lot about product design and about the individual end user interface design, and learn about the methods and process by which to create these large projects and get them to ship. What I really learned at Apple was about creating an experience, creating an emotional experience for customers. From the minute they first heard, and designing how they first heard about your product, and every step from learning about it, reading about it, purchasing it, unboxing it, the first minutes from the time you use it, the first couple weeks, and then, ultimately through its life cycle into the next one, right? Creating an experience that sings all the way along, and understanding how to create that was something that I learned. The packaging, how do you do the packaging right? All of that stuff was what I took away from Apple, was like, if you really believe in the thing that you're creating, make sure you pay attention to every single step along the way, and you will be rewarded for it by your customers, because they will appreciate it, because they will see that there has been love put into every single step. And those who know better will see it, and they will be amazed by it, right? And so that is the biggest takeaway. Most people are like, oh, I'll just program this up and then send it out, and it's a beta, right? We know in the internet world now everything's a beta, right? Well, when you pay for something versus something's free, when you pay, you want it to work, and you want it to work really well. And I think there's been a lot of quality that has been taken out of the system because of this internet, economy where everything's like, let's ship it quickly. It might not work perfectly, but we'll rev it in 3 weeks and 4 weeks and 4 months and whatever, as opposed to getting it right and having a great experience and then building on it and creating a culture around that inside your company to say, we're not going to ship half-baked things. We're going to ship real working things that we can be proud of, that we're not just, sending out to the market for our customers to have to endure the pain and suffering from.
So after the Apple adventure, you went into a new adventure, your own company, which was Nest. But with talk about Nest, there was a question from one of our people as well. Of course, Mr. X, who is from Apple France in the old days.
Hello, Tony. A very simple question, because I know you're a very busy person. If regular days would not last 24 hours, but 30, what would you do with that spare time?
If I had more hours in a day, what would I do? What would I do? It's a great question.
Monsieur X?
I think that if I had the time and it was given to me in a new chunk, I would think about it very differently, right? Because then you say, oh, wait a second, I have something new. I'm going to think about that differently. If every day was 30 hours, it would be just like every day was 24 hours. There would be no difference. And I think, when we look at our device usage and everything else, we need to start to, figure out how we run our lives as opposed to be, in some ways, victims to the digital world we've created. But that's for another time. But, to be really clear, my adventure after Apple wasn't Nest. I had a whole adventure between Apple and Nest that caused Nest to become what it is and what it was.
Well, I suggest we talk about in the next chapter, the Nest adventure. So you were talking about Nest, the idea of having this connected thermostat.
Right. Why?
Why?
Crazy?
No.
Complètement fou?
Oui. Amazing, Heidi.
No. When we left Apple, my wife and left Apple, we went on a tour around the world for a year and a half. So we went to different countries and lived in different homes with our kids, and we learned about different cultures, learned about, different, saw the sights and what have you. And through that experience, and at the same time, I was designing a home in Lake Tahoe to be the greenest, most connected home. And I had learned that there were all kinds of problems when designing a home with the infrastructure and these kinds of things and the controls. And while I was traveling the world and living in these different homes, I noticed that all of these homes had the same problems that I had with the home we were trying to design in Lake Tahoe. And so I was like, wait a second. No one has figured out how to fix these very basic things. And I was like, this is crazy. You can buy, iPods at the time or iPhones for, $500 or less dollars. But I would buy a $500, thermostat or $300 thermostat, and it was total crap. It was absolute crap. And you didn't know how to use them. There was no good user interface. And I was like, and I kept searching the world to find other products, and I couldn't find them. So I said, I'll just design one myself. And that's how it started.
So your thermostat, so you attracted Google. They bought you for $3.2 billion. So you're Steve Austin, the $3.2 million man. It's the title of the $6 million man in French.
Sorry for that.
And we've got a question from Stéphane Zibi, who you're going to see on the screen. Hi, Tony. A question on selling to Google. How did your former colleagues from Apple react when they learned that you'd sold Nest to Google?
So it's a great question. So let's first start when we launched Nest, when the Nest was first shown up. And so at the Nest launch party, because we were very secret for a long period of time, we didn't tell anybody what we were doing. I invited a lot of my friends from Apple there. And for months after, people were like, this is amazing, the Apple friends were like, this is amazing. You were able to take the Apple DNA and create something totally different. You're not competing with Apple. This is wonderful. You were able to, really truly embody the spirit of Apple in this new company. So that went really well. So that made me feel, and the team feel really proud that we made them feel proud, right? And then subsequently, after it was 4.5 years, then we sold to Google. And so many of the people that I knew at Apple, they were like, congratulations, right? They were absolutely congratulations. This is great, great for the team and everything else. We'll see what happens at Google. We'll see how it goes. We wish we would have gotten you, but they got you. That's fine. And there was no hard feelings per se. And we continued to work together. But of course, the two companies are competitive. But it was not personal. It was all about business, right? So I still have the friends from the Apple days and friends from the Google days. So you have to remember that in Silicon Valley, and I hope the same thing happens here in Paris and around the world, is, we all are individuals. And we all have ideas, and sometimes we work together on the same team. Sometimes we're competitors. But at the end of the day, we're all people. We should all be getting along, and we should all work together because you're in this business for a long time. I've been in this specific business for over 30 years. You cross paths so many different times with the same people in different contexts and what have you, to be petty, right, about it and say, oh, no, I don't like you anymore, blah, blah. That's not what this is, right? And, it's like good gamesmanship. If you lose a game, you say, good game, congratulations, we'll get together and compete again at the next game, or maybe we'll recruit you onto our team and those kinds of things. So, no, there was no bad blood that I was aware of. And, being around the Valley long enough, that's just how it goes. And it's a reminder to everybody to treat that way. Treat each other that way.
And it wasn't just a buyout because you took over the connected house, Internet of Things side of Google, and you had Google Assets. You were involved with that. And then in 2016, you decided to leave Google. So why did you decide to leave Google?
When you decide to sell a company, or at least when I decided to sell a company with the team, the way I think about it is this. There is a lot of stuff in the future that you don't know what's going to happen. You can't codify everything in a contract because it's literally like your baby, and what you're doing is you're getting married. The way I think about it is getting married, right? And there's certain things certain values that you have, there's certain kinds of things that you do with each other to build trust, keep the trust, and rules of the road you live by to have a good marriage, right? And so things were going well for the first year and a half for the most part. There were ups and downs, and but like in any relationship, nothing's perfect, right? But one day they came in and decided to change all the rules. And it was one-sided. And there was no negotiation, no discussion. There was nothing. This is what we want to have happen. And I was like, I'm not doing that. That's not what I signed up for. That's not what I was intending and what we agreed on doing. So no, I'm not doing that. And then after enough of those kinds of discussions, they got frustrated and they said, okay, well, we're going to sell the company. And I was like, oh, you want to sell Nest? I said, bien sûr, it's yours. Go ahead. You can do whatever you want, but I'm not going with it. And so that's what happened. And so subsequently, Nest is still there, but I'm not because of legal reasons. It's that simple.
You left Nest, you came to Paris. So this is heading for France. So Tony, you chose to come to Paris. So somebody who's a beginner in the business has got a question just for you.
Salut Tony.
Hi Tony. So this question will be in French because I know that now you speak better French than I do English. That's not difficult though. I mean, But anyway, how do you find Paris? I mean, you've been here for 2 years now. How do you find Paris has changed? Do you like it? I mean, is it as good as you thought it was?
Donc, j'aime à Paris.
Oui, je vois.
J'aime
Bravo,
Paris.
Bon
Après 2 ans et demi, ma famille aussi, j'aime Paris.
So did you force them to come? Did you make them come?
Force them to come?
No.
Faut me rassurer.
No.
Okay.
We need to remember, il y a 9 ans, nous avons habité à Paris pour la première fois.
Après le départ de...
After you left Apple?
Oui, juste après. And so this is when I met Xavier for the first time, was that it was 2009. And I saw a whole different side of Paris when you're not a tourist, right? And I didn't know who Xavier was. I just asked some friends, actually from General Magic. It's like, who do you know in Paris who I should go meet with? And the first name and the only name really was Xavier. So meet with Xavier. I was like, okay, I don't know anything. Okay. And so I just sent him an email. He's like, let's get together. So literally 48 hours later, I was in his office and I didn't know what to expect. And I went in, I was like, whoa. And it was free, right? And they were building all the boxes, all the, the set-top boxes. They were working on phone service. And I was just like, incroyable. I was stunned. And then Xavier and I started talking. And then what was supposed to be an hour turned into like 3 or 4 hours, right? And we just talked about Apple II, and we talked about Minitel, and we talked about modems, and all of these different things.
And you both started on an Apple II, Xavier, as well. So, I mean, Xavier founded 42, a free school to teach IT and coding. I mean, it's science fiction in the US, no, this sort of place.
Well, for 42 is very unique. And actually, that was, after meeting Xavier, we would come back every year. Because we had friends here now, and then we would come back and just to experience it more with our family. We left our children in the lycée in San Francisco, so they learned, fluent French because we had such a great time here. And so we would come back, and through Xavier's eyes, he would show me the drawings for École 42, and then Station F, and then I started coming here for the first time. I'm like, wait a second, this is a very different model. I've never seen anything like this before. Nothing in the States. And I was like, and the people around, the students, I was very energized. And so that happened, and I would come back, and I told Florian, anytime I would like to come and talk to the students, and if you want me, obviously. And then after that, then Station F was occurring, and then I started hearing from other people and seeing startups that were starting to happen here, and it was like, something's really changing. And so after Google, when we were wrapping up there, my wife just said, let's move to Paris with the family. Because we had bought something here, bought a pied de terre previously. And so I said, bien sûr, and off we went. On y va.
But seriously now, what do you think about the ecosystem which is emerging, with Station F? You've got other things as well, all these startups emerging in France. Do you think that in France there is a real future for startups? We're going to see them emerging, we're going to see a new Facebook, a new Google, as easily now as it was happening in Silicon Valley in the past?
So,
and if not, why not?
Okay, so first, there has been a ton of change in the last 5 years that I've seen. And it's not just one startup, but it's a whole environment that's being created. This school is one example, Station F's one example, but there's also lots of different venture capitals, lots of different startups. There have been exits already. The government is now supporting it with BPE and all kinds of other programs that they're changing. So there is this incredible environment that's being created that allows for this kind of outcome, okay, that you describe. But it takes time. Silicon Valley is a product of 50 to 60 years of where it is, okay? Now, it's not going to take that long because we all know better now and we can replicate it more quickly, but it's still a decade or 2 decades because it takes entrepreneurs, my first decade in Silicon Valley was entirely failure. I learned a lot, but it was failure after failure after failure. We're going to see that here as well. Every entrepreneur is going to go through many failures. VCs are going to go through failures because that's the way we learn, okay? So you're not going to be as ambitious as you should be in the first time around. You're not going to get all the right network. You're not going to have all the right people, but you learn by doing, you learn through failure, and you move on. So what we see now is starting to see second generation entrepreneurs, second generation startups being more ambitious, more money being able to access to these companies. So we're starting to see truly this environment flourish and new things come out of it. The one thing we have to understand is these new things, they're not going to be the next Facebook. They're not going to be the next Google. They're not going to be the next iPhone or Apple or what have you. We have to think in the future. If you're trying to replicate the past, you will sorely fail. You need to be ahead. Not too far ahead like General Magic was 15 years ahead. But you can't be thinking, I wish we had Facebook. If I think about the generation before the one here in Paris, it was a lot of people going, why can't we have that here? Why can't we? And it was more of people going upset and saying, let's copy that, right? As opposed to innovating beyond it. And that's what has to happen here is all these entrepreneurs have to innovate well beyond it and not think that they're trying to make that. Because as soon as you do that, you're not going to be successful because you're not differentiated. Right? And we see a lot of this with startups who go, well, I'm the European version of Stripe, or I'm the blah, blah, the French version of blah, blah, blah. That's going to be okay, but it'll be tiny. You got to think bigger than that, and you got to think differently as opposed to just replicating, because that's what Asia did, right? Japan copied the US, and then it came up. Then there was Korea copying the US, then copying Japan and the US came up. Then there was Taiwan, and then there's China, and then China copied for the first 7-8 years, and now it's a whole different story in China, right? They're now starting to really innovate in all new ways that we never thought of, right? So I'm thinking we're just before that kind of thing here. So we've copied enough, we've tried enough, we've failed enough. We're now on the verge of, okay, we're going to truly innovate. We're going to truly show the world how we can be different and not just copy just like, all of the different Asian kind of cultures did to get them to where they are today. If that makes sense.
So, Tony, a new life today, Paris? maybe forever. So what are your projects today? Can you tell us about the future? Can you tell us about your day-to-day life as well, and a new startup, FutureShape?
Sure, absolutely. I have we have a startup, and that startup's been going for 8 years now. I never think it's going to be more than that. It's always going to be a startup, because if you're never reinventing yourself, you're not growing. So it's always a startup. So FutureShape's an 8-year-old startup. And we invest in deep technology companies all around the world. So we have hundreds of investments that we put money into, and we help them not just with their technology, but with their business vision, their communications vision, and help them take what is disruptive. So what's a disruptive technology? Disruptive technology is something like multi-touch. Disruptive technology could be a pocketable hard drive. It could be DNA sequencing, right? All these different disruptive technologies. There's many more than that. In many different fields, whether it's agriculture or farm or food or financial or medicine or drugs or auto. There's many deep technology companies that can be created out of research that is happening in institutions all around Europe. We try to find those entrepreneurs who want to take that research and turn it into a company, and they have a good idea, but they may not know all the network of people, where to get the money, because these kinds of ventures take 7 to 12 to 15 years to come to fruition. Like, if you're going to do anything world-changing, it usually takes a decade to make that happen. Anything less than that, it's nice, but it's not going to change the world. It's not fundamentally. You're not going to change social behavior and stuff like that. And so we look at companies that are going to take 10 years, where most VCs run and hide. They're like, I need a 4-year, 5-year return. I need to see revenue. We're well pre-revenue. So we bet on entrepreneurs who understand the technology, and they bet on us because we know how to help them translate that technology into real working businesses, of real user-friendly products to then change the world. And so that's what FutureShape's about, and we work with entrepreneurs here in Paris, in France, in Europe, and Asia, and US, and Canada. It's a lot of fun. And the way I think about it really is that the only reason why I'm sitting up here, and the reason why ultimately the Nest happened and things of that nature, was because all along the way at General Magic, Apple, some of the startups I did, these kinds of things, there was a community of people who were mentoring and supporting me and helping me to grow, even through the failures, right? And and I kept wanting, I had the passion, the energy to keep going at it, even after some problem or whatever, and continue to push the edge. And those people helped me, even at Nest, to create what we've created. And so now it's time, when I turn back, I'm not young anymore, right? And it's now my time to, yes, I'm not. It's now time to give back to that community, just like it was given to me, and help new entrepreneurs realize their dreams and help them see success in changing the world in a positive manner.
Tony, unfortunately, the final question of the program, but we're thrilled to have you with us. So he set up a fund like you, and he's called Rodrigo Sepulveda Schultz, and you meet him sometimes at Station F. He's got a very special question for you as well about the future and using connected terminals, Internet of Things, and so on. Rodrigo.
Hey Tony, this is Rodrigo. You wrote an op-ed in Wired magazine back in April, and you've been outspoken on other media, including television in the US, about smartphone addiction. And you were writing about what Apple should be doing for regulating the time spent on a smartphone. So 3 questions in one. Can you tell us a bit more about your concerns about internet addiction and smartphone addiction? Second, do you think that recent announcements at the last keynote were sufficient, and what the rest of the industry could be doing about this problem? Thank you.
Bonne question.
C'est Rodrigo.
So, as I said previously, my first child was born just 3 weeks before the iPhone was introduced. So my kids have never known a world before that, right? Many of us know, all of us, know of the world pre-iPhone or pre-smartphone, right? Even back then, you could know people before the smartphone who were addicted to the internet or addicted to computing in general or addicted to work through computing, right? They could be on email all the time. They could be internet browsing all the time. It was only after the iPhone came and then everybody had it and everyone could geek out. And it wasn't just about work, but it was about games. It was about all these things. Then we started to realize there's a fundamental issue here. And the fundamental issue is that we need to have a balance between our digital life and our physical life, right? We're starting to see people run away and always being on these devices, not lifting their heads up. They're getting run over by cars or buses, right? They're walking into walls and things of that nature. And then that's for the adults, but then we're having a society, a new generation of kids who this is all they know, and they think this is the way to interact with each other is just through texting or through trolling or whatever else, not a face-to-face interaction where you really get to know people and really understand them better and be empathetic as opposed to hiding behind a screen. And so I believe that this has been a mounting issue for decades, not just when the iPhone showed up. The iPhone just made it so much easier for many more people to be always connected all the time to use whatever they want at any time. And so when you see something that you've helped to create incredible unintended consequences for adults and for children, you step up and you go, wait a second, I think we need to talk about this and get in the minds of everyone to see if this is really a problem. For me, I can't tell you how many times I would go to dinner with Xavier and Delphine, and they would go, what is your screen time rules for your kids? How do you control your screen? And this didn't just happen in Paris, this happened all around the world. Every dinner I went to with our friends, they would say, what do you do? What are your personal things? What are you doing with your kids? And because they were all concerned. And then I had kids of friends of mine who actually had to put their children into digital detox camp for 6 months or a year with no electronic communications because they were 14, 16-year-olds who literally were clinically addicted and they needed to go to special places to relieve themselves of that, right? To get beyond it. And so, whether I should bear the burden or not, I'm one of the people who are outside the industry now. Right? The people inside of Apple, people inside Google, people inside of all the app companies, they might understand it, but it may be hard for them to discuss it because of shareholders and all these other things. I can be an independent voice. I want to add an independent voice to all the people who come to me with their concerns, as well as what I see in my own family. And so that's why I raised that topic, and to have a discussion about it. And it's not just about you're an addict or you're not. And it's about self-control or you're not. It's always about that. It's only a very small bit. No, if we look at it, addicts don't know they're addicts until they admit they're addicts, right? And the only way they admit they're addicts is if they have some kind of quantifiable data to say, oh, I have more than 3 drinks a day, or I drink in the morning, or whatever. They need to see something. They need to understand, and then maybe, and only then, would they say, yes, I'm an addict. And then what's the second thing an addict should do if they want to stop being addicted? Or they're trending that way because they're starting going from 1 drink a night to 3 drinks a night, and like, oh, maybe it's getting bad. The next thing is, you got to get out of the environment you're in to be able to change your behavior, right? Because it's a self-reinforcing cycle. The issue is smartphones are a key way that we are going to live our life. They're part of how we do transactions, how we get rides, how we communicate. They are not going away. We can't just shut them off and put them away. That includes computers, tablets, TVs, right? Watches even. So we can't change that environment because it's so valuable to us. So if we can't get rid of it, we need the tools to control it. So we need the data to tell us how we are doing, and then we need the controls to be able to not, control our life or give us tools to help control it, but also to help us manage our screen time with our families, right? And so if we think about it, there's an analogy that we can all use, which we've created over the last 70, 80 years, which is for food, right? If we think about food, we eat 3 times a day, right? We eat certain portions. We know how many calories. We know what a protein is. We know what a fat is, a salt is, sugars, caffeine, nicotine. We know all of these kinds of things. We've created daily consumptive patterns, right? And we're educated. And when we buy something, it has a list of ingredients as well as, benefits and, bad things in it. We need the same thing for our digital consumption. We need to be able to track what we use. We need to know what we buy and what's inside of it. Does it have notifications? Are the notifications going to come every 2 minutes to get me to try to hook in? We need to have that kind of language. We need to have the controls, because the iPod or the iPhone or the iPad, it's not the thing that's addictive. It's the apps that we use on them that are addictive, right? It's just the refrigerator. It's the food inside or the apps. And so we need to be able to control those things. Now, after a lot of, not just myself, but a lot of other people bringing up this subject, it was great to see that Apple and Google, right, in June and May, announced their tools to help us manage this. Are they perfect? No. Are they complete? No. But they're a good first step that literally within, a year or less, we're starting to see movement there. But there's a lot more that can be done, but I applaud them both and also Amazon, for getting started, right? And we're going to make those tools better over time. But this is a growing situation, and people are becoming digitally obese, and they don't know it. And we need to move faster on this topic. And I think everybody's charged on it. And I think we're going to see a lot of great changes over the next year and a half to address it.
So thanks a lot.
So thank you so much, Tony. It was a great moment to have you in this program. Thank you for accepting our invitation once again. We'd love, we could talk for hours with you. And thank you for helping us to discover the background to your passion, which is tech, of course, and being so open-minded as well with us. It's very rare, I think, in this sector. It's rare in Apple as well, and I'd like to thank you. So I'm going to stand up. So a big thanks to the technical teams from Studio 42 who have enabled us to make this program. So a round of applause under, of course, Mathieu Trentin and all the Pixels, Gabriel Chojnecki, Adrien Ruello, Maxime Ducreux, Jacques Dugnol, Alizé Castré-Généreux, and Pauline Espalieu. A big thanks to 42, which has welcomed us every week, Nicolas Sadirac, Fabienne Haas in Com, and of course Charlie, and of course the technical team producing this program, Electric Dreams, beginning with our director, Alexis Frémont, Vincent Pouradier, Lionel Martin, our photo, Christophe Modello, our sound engineer, interpreter, Bernard Reeves, whose voice you heard on the program, Pierre Valek for marketing and sponsoring, Sarah Frigora, our stagiaire, our intern, and a big thanks to you for staying with us over the past 9 years.
Mille merci.
So we'll see you after summer for the next one. Bye-bye.
Merci.